Marcus Hendricks stepped off the tour bus outside Buckingham Palace with his smartphone already recording. The 28-year-old American influencer had built his social media empire on one simple principle. The more outrageous the content, the more views he received. With over 2 million followers eagerly waiting for his next viral moment, Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with planning something spectacular. London had been good to him so far. His previous videos from the trip had already garnered hundreds of thousands of views. There was the incident at the Tower Bridge where he pretended to propose to a random stranger, the fake emergency call at Westminster Abbey, and the deliberately obnoxious behavior at a fancy restaurant in Mayfair. Each stunt had been carefully calculated to generate maximum controversy while staying just barely within legal boundaries. But Marcus wanted something bigger for his grand finale. Something that would cement his reputation as the most daring content creator on the platform. As he surveyed the iconic gates of Buckingham Palace, his eyes fell upon the motionless figure of a royal guard standing at attention. The guard stood perfectly still in his distinctive red tunic and tall black bearskin hat, rifle at his side, eyes staring straight ahead with military precision. Marcus had heard about these guards before. They were famous for their unwavering discipline, trained never to react to tourists no matter how ridiculous the provocation. Thousands of visitors tried daily to make them laugh, smile, or even blink, but the guards remained as still as statues. It was this legendary composure that sparked an idea in Marcus's twisted mind. He began circling the guard like a predator studying its prey, his phone capturing every angle. The guard was young, probably in his early 20s, with a clean-shaven face set in stoic determination. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. This was clearly someone who took his duty seriously, someone who had trained for months to achieve this level of discipline. Marcus started with the usual tourist antics. He made funny faces inches from the guard's face, told jokes, even did a little dance. The guard remained completely motionless, not even his eyes betraying any acknowledgement of the disruption. Other tourists gathered around, some filming the interaction, others shaking their heads in disapproval at Marcus's behavior. But Marcus was just getting started. He had noticed something during his reconnaissance of the area. The guards were required to stand in the same position for hours at a time, often in uncomfortable weather conditions. They couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even swat away flies that might land on their faces. This level of helplessness gave Marcus a sick sense of power. He pulled out a small bag from his backpack, something he had purchased from a novelty shop earlier that morning. Inside was a collection of items that most people would consider harmless pranks. Fake insects, a small horn, some silly string, and other cheap gag gifts. But Marcus had a more sinister plan brewing in his mind. The crowd around him had grown larger, with people pointing and whispering about the obnoxious American tourist. Some were encouraging him, laughing at his antics and asking him to do more. Others looked disgusted, muttering complaints about disrespectful visitors ruining the solemnity of the place. Marcus thrived on both reactions equally. He began narrating to his phone camera, explaining to his followers how he was about to pull off the ultimate prank. His voice carried that familiar cocky tone that had made him internet famous but also earned him countless enemies. He spoke about the guards as if they were objects rather than human beings, describing his plan to break the stoic soldier standing before him. The guard, whose name was James Morrison, had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 8 months. This was his dream job, something he had worked toward since childhood. He came from a military family and understood the honor that came with protecting the royal family. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace was not just a job for him. It was a sacred duty that connected him to centuries of British military tradition. James had endured worse than annoying tourists during his training. He had been screamed at by drill sergeants, forced to march for hours in brutal weather, and pushed to his physical and mental limits. A silly American with a camera was hardly going to break his concentration. But something about this particular tourist felt different. There was a malicious energy radiating from the man that made James's military instincts bristle with warning. Marcus continued his performance, growing bolder with each passing minute. He started making increasingly inappropriate comments about the Queen, about British culture, and about the military. His followers were eating it up, with the live viewer count climbing rapidly as word spread about his latest stunt. The comment section was exploding with laughing emojis and requests for him to do something even more outrageous. The other tourists were beginning to back away, sensing that something was about to cross a line. A few concerned visitors had even approached the nearby police officers, pointing toward Marcus and expressing their worry about his escalating behavior. But Marcus was lost in his own world of social media glory, completely oblivious to the gathering storm clouds around him. As the afternoon sun beat down on the palace grounds, Marcus prepared to execute the prank that he believed would make him internet legend. He had no idea that in less than an hour, his entire life would be turned upside down, and his name would indeed become famous, but for all the wrong reasons. The stage was set for a confrontation that would teach him a brutal lesson about respect, consequences, and the difference between entertainment and humiliation. Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out what he considered his secret weapon, a small plastic bottle filled with a mixture he had concocted that morning in his hotel room. The brownish liquid looked disturbingly realistic, designed to resemble something far more disgusting than it actually was. It was a combination of chocolate syrup, mustard, and some food coloring that created the perfect illusion for his twisted prank. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, forming a loose circle around Marcus and the stoic guard. Most tourists had their phones out, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and growing unease. Several people in the crowd had begun expressing their disapproval more loudly, but Marcus fed off the controversy like a vampire feeds on blood. He began his final approach, speaking directly to his live stream audience. His voice carried that same arrogant confidence that had made him internet famous, but there was something darker in his tone now. He described the guard as if he were an inanimate object, a prop in his performance rather than a human being with feelings and dignity. James Morrison felt every muscle in his body tense as the obnoxious tourist moved closer with the mysterious bottle. His military training had taught him to assess threats, and every instinct he possessed was screaming warnings. But his duty required him to remain motionless unless there was an immediate physical danger to himself or others. The internal conflict between his human desire to defend himself and his professional obligation to maintain position created an almost unbearable psychological pressure. Marcus unscrewed the cap of the bottle, making sure his camera captured every detail of the disgusting-looking contents. He had practiced this moment in his hotel room, perfecting the angle and timing for maximum visual impact. His followers were going wild in the comments, with thousands of viewers urging him on while others begged him to stop before he went too far. The security cameras around Buckingham Palace were recording everything, but Marcus was too caught up in his performance to consider the legal implications. He had convinced himself that because the mixture was harmless, he could claim it was just a harmless prank if anyone tried to prosecute him. His understanding of British law was limited, and his arrogance had blinded him to the severity of what he was about to do. With a theatrical flourish, Marcus raised the bottle above James's head. The crowd gasped collectively, some people shouting for him to stop, others pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly about to become a viral moment. The tension in the air was palpable, like the moment before lightning strikes. James could see the bottle in his peripheral vision, could smell the disgusting mixture that was about to be poured on him. His jaw clenched involuntarily, the only sign of his inner turmoil. He thought about his family, about the pride in his father's eyes when he had earned his position in the Queen's Guard, about the generations of military tradition he represented. The humiliation he was about to endure felt like a personal attack on everything he held sacred. Marcus tilted the bottle, and the brown liquid began to pour. It splashed across James's immaculate red tunic, ran down his face, and dripped onto his polished black boots. The crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps, nervous laughter, and outright condemnation. Some people were cheering Marcus on, caught up in the spectacle, while others began shouting angrily at him to stop. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had brought a second bottle, this one filled with a mixture designed to look like vomit. The smell was intentionally nauseating, created with ingredients that would make anyone gag. He began pouring this concoction over James's bearskin hat, laughing maniacally as he provided commentary for his live stream. The guard's uniform, which had been pristine moments before, was now covered in fake bodily fluids. The smell was overwhelming, causing nearby tourists to back away in disgust. Marcus continued his performance, making crude jokes and encouraging his followers to share the video for maximum viral impact. James Morrison had never experienced humiliation like this in his entire life. The physical discomfort of the disgusting substances was nothing compared to the psychological torture of being unable to defend himself. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but not for this level of personal degradation broadcast to millions of people online. The other guards stationed around the palace could see what was happening, but protocol prevented them from abandoning their posts. They watched helplessly as their colleague endured the assault, their own anger and frustration building with each passing second. Radio communications crackled between security personnel as they coordinated a response to the situation. Palace security guards in plain clothes had been monitoring the situation from the beginning, and they were already moving into position. Metropolitan police officers were also converging on the scene, having been alerted by concerned tourists and their own surveillance systems. But Marcus was so lost in his performance that he failed to notice the net closing around him. The livestream viewer count had exploded to over 50,000 people. With the video being shared across multiple social media platforms simultaneously, comments were flooding in faster than anyone could read them, ranging from laughing emojis to death threats. The incident was becoming a global news story in real time, but Marcus remained oblivious to the true magnitude of what he had unleashed. As he prepared to pour a third bottle of his disgusting concoction, this one designed to complete his trilogy of humiliation, Marcus finally noticed the serious-looking men in suits approaching from multiple directions. For the first time since beginning his prank, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The crowd had grown hostile, with angry shouts drowning out the nervous laughter. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable amusement to genuine outrage. James Morrison remained at attention, despite the degrading substances covering his uniform and dripping from his face. His eyes stared straight ahead, but inside, he was counting the seconds until this nightmare would end. He had no idea that this moment of personal humiliation would ultimately lead to justice, or that the man responsible for his suffering was about to learn a very harsh lesson about the difference between viral fame and real-world consequences. The moment Marcus reached for his third bottle, 3 Metropolitan police officers emerged from the crowd with swift, practiced movements. Their faces were stern, their voices commanding as they ordered him to stop immediately and step away from the guard. The party atmosphere that Marcus had been cultivating instantly evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of law enforcement intervention. Marcus looked around frantically, his phone still streaming live to his massive audience. For the first time since arriving in London, he felt genuine fear creeping into his chest. The officers weren't smiling or treating this as a harmless tourist prank. Their professional demeanor and serious expressions made it clear that he had crossed a line he hadn't even known existed. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police, stepped forward as the lead officer. She had seen plenty of tourist incidents over the years, but this level of deliberate humiliation toward a serving member of the military had triggered both her professional instincts and personal outrage. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had dealt with far worse criminals than Marcus. But there was something particularly cold in her tone. The crowd began to shift and murmur as more uniformed officers appeared from various directions. Palace security personnel in their distinctive suits moved in to coordinate with the police, while additional guards took positions to ensure the situation remained contained. What had started as Marcus's personal entertainment had become a coordinated law enforcement response involving multiple agencies. Marcus tried to maintain his cocky demeanor, speaking to his phone camera about police overreach and claiming his rights as an American citizen, but his voice had lost its confident edge, replaced by a nervous energy that his followers could clearly detect through the live stream. Comments began shifting from encouragement to concern, with many viewers suddenly realizing they were watching someone destroy their life in real time. Detective Inspector Collins informed Marcus that he was being arrested on suspicion of assault, criminal damage, and breach of public order. The legal terminology hit him like a physical blow. These weren't minor infractions that would result in a slap on the wrist. These were serious criminal charges that could result in jail time, substantial fines, and a permanent criminal record. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus's phone was taken as evidence. His live stream cut off abruptly, leaving 50,000 viewers staring at blank screens. But the damage was already done. The video had been screen recorded by hundreds of people and was already being uploaded to various platforms faster than it could be removed. Marcus's moment of viral fame was rapidly becoming a permanent digital scar. James Morrison was finally relieved from his post, escorted by senior officers to a private area where he could clean himself up and receive medical attention if needed. The psychological impact of the assault was evident in his shaken demeanor, though he maintained his military bearing even in this moment of personal crisis. Medical personnel checked him for any adverse reactions to the substances that had been poured on him, while senior military officials began documenting the incident for their own investigation. The crowd slowly dispersed, but many tourists continued filming and taking photos of Marcus being led away in handcuffs. The image of the arrogant influencer being arrested at Buckingham Palace was already becoming iconic, shared millions of times across social media platforms within the first hour. His face, twisted with shock and growing panic, became a meme almost instantly. News organizations picked up the story with frightening speed. British tabloids were already running headlines about the disgusting American tourist who had assaulted a royal guard. International news outlets began covering the story as an example of social media culture gone wrong. Marcus's name was trending globally, but not in the way he had hoped. In the police van, Marcus tried to process what was happening to him. The reality of his situation began to sink in as officers explained the charges he was facing. Assault on a member of the military was taken particularly seriously in the United Kingdom, especially when it occurred at a royal residence. The combination of the location, the victim's status, and the public nature of the incident had elevated what Marcus thought was a harmless prank into a major criminal matter. His social media accounts were exploding with activity, but not the kind he usually enjoyed. While some of his most devoted followers were defending him, the vast majority of comments were expressing disgust, anger, and calls for justice. Brands that had sponsored his content began distancing themselves immediately, issuing statements condemning his actions and terminating their partnerships. His carefully built influencer empire was crumbling in real time. The legal process moved swiftly. Marcus was transported to a central London police station, where he was formally booked and processed. His belongings were catalogued as evidence, including the remaining bottles of fake bodily fluids he had planned to use. Photography documented every aspect of his arrest, creating an official record that would follow him for the rest of his life. During his first interview with detectives, Marcus's American bravado completely collapsed. The weight of potential consequences began to crush his inflated ego. When officers explained that he could face up to 6 months in prison and substantial fines, the color drained from his face. His passport was confiscated, meaning he couldn't flee back to the United States to escape the consequences of his actions. The British public's reaction was swift and merciless. Social media was flooded with condemnation of Marcus's behavior, with many people expressing particular sympathy for James Morrison. The hashtag Justice for the Guard began trending, with thousands of people sharing messages of support for the humiliated soldier, and calls for Marcus to face the full consequences of his actions. Military veterans and serving personnel from around the world began sharing the video as an example of the disrespect their community faced. The incident had struck a nerve that went far beyond a simple tourist prank. It had become a symbol of entitled behavior and the dangerous lengths people would go to for social media fame. As Marcus sat in his holding cell that first night, the magnitude of his mistake began to truly dawn on him. The viral fame he had sought had turned into global infamy. His name would forever be associated with one of the most disgraceful tourist incidents in recent British history. The guard he had humiliated was being hailed as a hero for his restraint and professionalism, while Marcus was becoming the face of everything wrong with internet culture. Within 24 hours of Marcus's arrest, the internet had transformed him from an influencer into the most hated person on social media. The video of his assault on James Morrison had been viewed over 10 million times across various platforms, with each viewing generating fresh waves of outrage and condemnation. What Marcus had intended as his crowning achievement had become a digital scarlet letter that would follow him forever. Technology-savvy users had quickly identified Marcus through his social media profiles, linking his real name to the incident before police had even released his identity publicly. His personal information, including his home address in Los Angeles, began circulating on forums and social media platforms. While most people limited themselves to expressing disgust online, the sheer volume of attention had attracted the attention of more dangerous elements of internet culture. James Morrison, meanwhile, had become an unexpected folk hero. British tabloids ran stories about his military service, his family background, and his exemplary record as a royal guard. A crowdfunding campaign set up by sympathetic strangers had raised over £50,000 for him within the first day, with donors from around the world expressing their admiration for his professionalism. Under such humiliating circumstances, military veterans organizations praised his restraint and discipline in the face of unprecedented provocation. Marcus's legal situation deteriorated rapidly as more charges were added to his case. The Crown Prosecution Service announced they were pursuing the matter with full vigor, citing the need to send a clear message about respect for British institutions and military personnel. Additional charges included criminal damage to military property, since James's uniform had been destroyed and would need professional cleaning and possible replacement. The total value of the damage was calculated at over £2,000. His American lawyer, hastily hired by his panicked family, explained the harsh reality of the British legal system. Unlike the United States, where celebrity status and social media fame might generate sympathy or lenient treatment, British courts took a dim view of tourists who showed disrespect to national institutions. The lawyer warned Marcus that jail time was not just possible, but probable, especially given the public outcry and the symbolic importance of the case. The media circus surrounding the case intensified daily. British newspapers competed to find the most creative ways to express their outrage, with headlines ranging from "Yankee disgrace" to "The tourist who shamed America." American media outlets, initially defensive of their countrymen, quickly distanced themselves as the full video evidence emerged and public opinion solidified against Marcus. Even his hometown newspaper ran an editorial condemning his actions and expressing embarrassment that he represented their community. Marcus's social media accounts, which had been his source of income and identity, became digital graveyards. His follower count plummeted as people abandoned him in droves, while those who remained seemed to exist solely to post angry comments and threats. Brand partnerships that had taken years to cultivate disappeared overnight, with companies issuing public statements condemning his behavior and donating to military charities as a form of public penance for their past association with him. The financial consequences began to mount quickly. His management company dropped him immediately, concerned about protecting their other clients from association with the scandal. Revenue from his social media content stopped entirely as platforms began demonetizing his accounts and restricting his ability to post new content. The legal fees alone were threatening to bankrupt him, with his British legal team warning that the case could drag on for months. Prison authorities kept Marcus in protective custody during his remand period, concerned about his safety among other inmates. Many of the prisoners had military backgrounds or family members in the armed forces, and the video of his assault on James Morrison had circulated even within the prison system. His daily routine consisted of staying in his cell for 23 hours a day, with limited access to communications and no internet access whatsoever. The psychological impact of his sudden fall from internet stardom to global pariah was devastating. Marcus had built his entire identity around his online persona and social media success. Without constant validation from his followers and the dopamine hit of viral content, he experienced what could only be described as withdrawal symptoms. The silence was deafening for someone accustomed to constant digital noise and attention. International diplomatic tensions even began to emerge from the incident. British officials privately expressed frustration with American tourist behavior, while some American politicians attempted to defend Marcus as a victim of British overreach. However, these political postures quickly collapsed as the full extent of his actions became clear and public opinion on both sides of the Atlantic solidified against him. Mental health experts began using Marcus's case as an example of social media addiction and the dangerous lengths people would go to for online validation. Academic papers were already being written about the incident as a case study in digital age narcissism and the disconnect between online behavior and real-world consequences. His name was becoming synonymous with the worst aspects of influencer culture. Back in the United States, Marcus's family struggled to cope with the global attention and shame. His parents, who had initially been proud of his social media success, found themselves fielding calls from reporters and dealing with protesters outside their home. His younger sister was forced to change schools due to bullying from classmates who recognized their family name. The ripple effects of his actions were destroying the lives of people who had nothing to do with his decision. James Morrison, in contrast, was handling his unexpected fame with the same dignity he had shown during the assault. He gave a single, carefully worded interview expressing his hope that the incident would lead to greater respect for military personnel and their service. He donated a significant portion of the crowdfunding money to military charities, keeping only what was necessary to replace his damaged personal items. His restraint and grace under pressure made Marcus's behavior appear even more deplorable by comparison. The legal system continued to grind forward methodically. Marcus's bail conditions included surrendering his passport, reporting to police daily, and a complete ban on social media activity. The court had recognized that his entire motivation for the crime had been online attention, so removing his access to that validation was considered both punishment and prevention. For someone whose life had revolved around digital engagement, the isolation was torture. As his court date approached, Marcus began to understand that this was not going to be a slap on the wrist or a minor inconvenience that would blow over in a few weeks. This was a life-altering event that would define him forever. The internet never forgets, and his moment of seeking viral fame had become a permanent stain on his existence that no amount of apologies or rehabilitation could ever fully erase. Within 24 hours of Marcus's arrest, the internet had transformed him from an influencer into the most hated person on social media. The video of his assault on James Morrison had been viewed over 10 million times across various platforms, with each viewing generating fresh waves of outrage and condemnation. What Marcus had intended as his crowning achievement had become a digital scarlet letter that would follow him forever. Technology-savvy users had quickly identified Marcus through his social media profiles, linking his real name to the incident before police had even released his identity publicly. His personal information, including his home address in Los Angeles, began circulating on forums and social media platforms. While most people limited themselves to expressing disgust online, the sheer volume of attention had attracted the attention of more dangerous elements of internet culture. James Morrison, meanwhile, had become an unexpected folk hero. British tabloids ran stories about his military service, his family background, and his exemplary record as a royal guard. A crowdfunding campaign set up by sympathetic strangers had raised over £50,000 for him within the first day, with donors from around the world expressing their admiration for his professionalism under such humiliating circumstances. Military veterans organizations praised his restraint and discipline in the face of unprecedented provocation. Marcus's legal situation deteriorated rapidly as more charges were added to his case. The Crown Prosecution Service announced they were pursuing the matter with full vigor, citing the need to send a clear message about respect for British institutions and military personnel. Additional charges included criminal damage to military property, since James's uniform had been destroyed and would need professional cleaning and possible replacement. The total value of the damage was calculated at over £2,000. His American lawyer, hastily hired by his panicked family, explained the harsh reality of the British legal system. Unlike the United States, where celebrity status and social media fame might generate sympathy or lenient treatment, British courts took a dim view of tourists who showed disrespect to national institutions. The lawyer warned Marcus that jail time was not just possible, but probable, especially given the public outcry and the symbolic importance of the case. The media circus surrounding the case intensified daily. British newspapers competed to find the most creative ways to express their outrage, with headlines ranging from "Yankee disgrace" to "The tourist who shamed America." American media outlets, initially defensive of their countrymen, quickly distanced themselves as the full video evidence emerged and public opinion solidified against Marcus. Even his hometown newspaper ran an editorial condemning his actions and expressing embarrassment that he represented their community. Marcus's social media accounts, which had been his source of income and identity, became digital graveyards. His follower count plummeted as people abandoned him in droves, while those who remained seemed to exist solely to post angry comments and threats. Brand partnerships that had taken years to cultivate disappeared overnight, with companies issuing public statements condemning his behavior and donating to military charities as a form of public penance for their past association with him. The financial consequences began to mount quickly. His management company dropped him immediately, concerned about protecting their other clients from association with the scandal. Revenue from his social media content stopped entirely as platforms began demonetizing his accounts and restricting his ability to post new content. The legal fees alone were threatening to bankrupt him, with his British legal team warning that the case could drag on for months. Prison authorities kept Marcus in protective custody during his remand period, concerned about his safety among other inmates. Many of the prisoners had military backgrounds or family members in the armed forces, and the video of his assault on James Morrison had circulated even within the prison system. His daily routine consisted of staying in his cell for 23 hours a day, with limited access to communications and no internet access whatsoever. The psychological impact of his sudden fall from internet stardom to global pariah was devastating. Marcus had built his entire identity around his online persona and social media success. Without constant validation from his followers and the dopamine hit of viral content, he experienced what could only be described as withdrawal symptoms. The silence was deafening for someone accustomed to constant digital noise and attention. International diplomatic tensions even began to emerge from the incident. British officials privately expressed frustration with American tourist behavior, while some American politicians attempted to defend Marcus as a victim of British overreach. However, these political postures quickly collapsed as the full extent of his actions became clear and public opinion on both sides of the Atlantic solidified against him. Mental health experts began using Marcus's case as an example of social media addiction and the dangerous lengths people would go to for online validation. Academic papers were already being written about the incident as a case study in digital age narcissism and the disconnect between online behavior and real-world consequences. His name was becoming synonymous with the worst aspects of influencer culture. Back in the United States, Marcus's family struggled to cope with the global attention and shame. His parents, who had initially been proud of his social media success, found themselves fielding calls from reporters and dealing with protesters outside their home. His younger sister was forced to change schools due to bullying from classmates who recognized their family name. The ripple effects of his actions were destroying the lives of people who had nothing to do with his decision. James Morrison, in contrast, was handling his unexpected fame with the same dignity he had shown during the assault. He gave a single, carefully worded interview expressing his hope that the incident would lead to greater respect for military personnel and their service. He donated a significant portion of the crowdfunding money to military charities, keeping only what was necessary to replace his damaged personal items. His restraint and grace under pressure made Marcus's behavior appear even more deplorable by comparison. The legal system continued to grind forward methodically. Marcus's bail conditions included surrendering his passport, reporting to police daily, and a complete ban on social media activity. The court had recognized that his entire motivation for the crime had been online attention, so removing his access to that validation was considered both punishment and prevention. For someone whose life had revolved around digital engagement, the isolation was torture. As his court date approached, Marcus began to understand that this was not going to be a slap on the wrist or a minor inconvenience that would blow over in a few weeks. This was a life-altering event that would define him forever. The internet never forgets, and his moment of seeking viral fame had become a permanent stain on his existence that no amount of apologies or rehabilitation could ever fully erase. The courtroom at Westminster Magistrates Court was packed beyond capacity on the morning of Marcus's trial. Public interest in the case had reached fever pitch, with people queuing outside from dawn to secure seats in the public gallery. International media outlets had sent reporters to cover what had become known as the Royal Guard humiliation trial while protesters gathered outside holding signs, demanding justice for James Morrison. Marcus entered the courthouse through a side entrance, flanked by police officers and his legal team. Gone was the confident, cocky demeanor that had defined his online persona. The man who walked into that courtroom bore little resemblance to the arrogant influencer who had assaulted a royal guard just 6 weeks earlier. His face was gaunt, his expensive clothes replaced by a simple suit, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything. District Judge Patricia Harrington presided over the proceedings with the stern efficiency that had made her one of Britain's most respected magistrates. She had reviewed the case files extensively and was well aware of the international attention focused on her courtroom. The charges were read aloud: assault on a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, criminal damage to military property, breach of public order and causing harassment, alarm, and distress. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor David Mitchell, presented their case with methodical precision. The video evidence was played multiple times, each viewing causing audible gasps and angry murmurs from the packed public gallery. Mitchell described Marcus's actions as a calculated assault designed to humiliate a serving member of the British military for personal gain and internet fame. He emphasized the premeditated nature of the attack, pointing out that Marcus had purchased the materials specifically for this purpose and had planned the assault in advance. James Morrison took the witness stand with the same dignity and composure he had shown during the assault. His testimony was powerful and restrained, describing the psychological impact of being unable to defend himself while being humiliated in front of thousands of people. He spoke about the pride he took in his service, the traditions he represented, and how the assault had affected not just him personally but his family and fellow service members who had watched helplessly as he endured the degradation. The defense strategy was limited and desperate. Marcus's barrister, Simon Crawford, attempted to portray his client as a misguided young man who had made a terrible error in judgment while under the influence of social media culture. He argued that Marcus had never intended to cause genuine harm, and that the substances used were harmless pranking materials rather than truly dangerous chemicals. The argument fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence and public sentiment. Medical experts testified about the potential health risks of the substances Marcus had used, describing how the combination of chemicals could have caused skin irritation, respiratory problems, or allergic reactions. Military officials spoke about the symbolic importance of the Royal Guard's uniform and the centuries of tradition that Marcus had desecrated with his actions. Each witness added another layer to the prosecution's case, building an overwhelming argument for severe punishment. Marcus was given the opportunity to address the court directly. His prepared statement was a rambling, self-serving apology that seemed to focus more on his own suffering than on the harm he had caused to James Morrison. He spoke about losing his career, his reputation, and his mental health, but failed to demonstrate genuine understanding of why his actions had been so fundamentally wrong. Judge Harrington's expression remained stern throughout his statement, clearly unimpressed by his attempt at contrition. The victim impact statements proved to be the most powerful moments of the trial. James Morrison's family members spoke about the shame and anger they had felt, watching their son and brother being humiliated on a global stage. Fellow Royal Guards testified about the effect on morale and the additional harassment they had faced from copycat incidents inspired by Marcus's video. Military veterans described feeling personally attacked by the assault on their traditions and values. Character witnesses for Marcus painted a picture of a young man who had become increasingly disconnected from reality as his social media fame grew. Former friends described how success had changed him, making him more willing to cross ethical boundaries for content and views. His own family members struggled to defend his actions, their testimony revealing the strain his behavior had placed on their relationships long before the London incident. Judge Harrington retired to consider her verdict and sentencing. The wait felt endless as reporters speculated about the potential punishment and crowds gathered outside the courthouse continued to grow. Social media was alive with commentary and predictions. While legal experts debated the precedent, this case might set for similar incidents involving social media stunts and public humiliation. When court reconvened, Judge Harrington delivered a scathing assessment of Marcus's character and actions. She described his assault on James Morrison as a calculated attack on British values and military traditions, motivated purely by narcissism and greed. She noted that his apology seemed hollow and self-serving, focused more on his own consequences than on the harm he had caused to his victim. The sentence was harsh, but legally justified. Marcus was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, followed by 12 months community service upon release. He was ordered to pay £15,000 in compensation to James Morrison, plus court costs and restitution for the damaged military property. Additionally, he was banned from entering the United Kingdom for 10 years after completing his sentence, and his social media activities would be monitored by probation services. The courtroom erupted in applause as the sentence was announced, with many observers feeling that justice had finally been served. Marcus visibly collapsed as the reality of his punishment hit him. 6 months in a British prison, financial ruin, and a decade-long ban from the country where his life had fallen apart. The gavel came down with finality, sealing his fate and marking the end of his transformation from internet celebrity to convicted criminal. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs to begin his prison sentence, James Morrison watched from the public gallery with quiet satisfaction. The guard who had endured humiliation with such dignity was finally seeing his attacker face the consequences of his actions. Outside the courthouse, crowds cheered as news of the sentence spread, while international media reported on what many saw as a watershed moment in holding social media influencers accountable for their actions. The case had set a powerful precedent, sending a clear message that viral fame would not protect anyone from the consequences of criminal behavior. Marcus's journey from influencer to inmate was complete, and his name would forever be associated with one of the most shameful incidents in the history of social media culture. Marcus's release from HMP Pentonville attracted a media circus that rivaled his original arrest. Photographers and reporters lined the streets outside the prison gates, hoping to capture the first images of the disgraced influencer returning to freedom. But the man who emerged bore little resemblance to the arrogant tourist who had assaulted James Morrison 8 months earlier. Marcus walked out quietly, his head down, accompanied only by a probation officer and a legal aid solicitor who helped him navigate the crowd. The conditions of his release were strict and comprehensive. Marcus was required to complete 12 months of community service, working with military veteran support organizations under close supervision. He was prohibited from using social media platforms for the duration of his probation, with regular monitoring of his internet activity to ensure compliance. Any violation of these terms would result in immediate return to prison to serve additional time. His first assignment was at a homeless shelter in East London that specifically served military veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, and housing insecurity. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. The man who had humiliated a serving soldier would spend the next year cleaning floors, serving meals, and listening to the stories of veterans who had sacrificed everything for their country and received little support in return. The work was harder than anything Marcus had ever done, both physically and emotionally. Many of the veterans he served had been damaged by their military service, carrying invisible wounds that manifested in addiction, mental illness, and social isolation. Listening to their stories of combat, loss, and abandonment gave Marcus a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by people like James Morrison and the communities that supported them. Marcus lived in a small bedsit in a rough area of London, a stark contrast to the luxury accommodations he had enjoyed during his influencer career. His financial situation was desperate, with his savings depleted by legal fees and the compensation payment to James Morrison. He worked a second job stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store, earning minimum wage and trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. The public's memory of his crime remained fresh and unforgiving. He was regularly recognized on the street, leading to confrontations ranging from verbal abuse to physical threats. Social media continued to circulate videos of his assault on James Morrison, ensuring that his moment of infamy would follow him forever. Several job applications were rejected when employers discovered his identity, and he was asked to leave restaurants and shops when other customers complained about his presence. James Morrison, meanwhile, had used his unexpected fame to become an advocate for military personnel and veteran support services. He gave speeches at schools and community organizations about the importance of service and respect for democratic institutions. The crowdfunding campaign that had supported him after the assault had grown into a permanent foundation, providing mental health services for military personnel, dealing with public harassment and social media abuse. The contrast between their post-incident lives was stark and telling. James had transformed his moment of humiliation into a platform for positive change, using his experience to help others and strengthen the institutions he served. Marcus, in contrast, was learning hard lessons about accountability, consequence, and the difference between genuine redemption and mere survival. His community service supervisor, Margaret Walsh, was a former military nurse who had served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. She had no sympathy for Marcus's self-pity, but recognized genuine effort when she saw it. Over the months, she watched him slowly develop real empathy for the veterans he served, moving beyond performative contrition to genuine understanding of the harm he had caused. The media occasionally attempted to interview Marcus about his experiences, offering substantial sums for exclusive access to his redemption story. He declined all offers, understanding that any attempt to monetize his transformation would undermine its authenticity and likely violate his probation terms. The silence only increased media interest, with some outlets speculating about secret book deals or comeback plans. His family relationships remained strained despite his apparent transformation. His parents struggled to forgive him not just for his actions but for the years of increasingly selfish behavior that had led to the assault. His sister had built a new life under a different name and made it clear that she wanted no contact with him until he could prove through sustained action that he had genuinely changed. As his probation period neared its end, Marcus faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Media offers continued to arrive, promising wealth and renewed fame if he would tell his story of fall and redemption. Entertainment executives suggested reality shows, book deals, and speaking engagements that could restore his celebrity status and financial security. But Marcus had learned that true redemption couldn't be performed for an audience or measured in social media metrics. He chose instead to continue his work with veteran support services, declining all media offers and focusing on genuine service rather than public rehabilitation of his image. He applied for permanent residency in the United Kingdom, wanting to dedicate his life to serving the community he had wronged. The transformation was real but fragile, requiring constant vigilance against the narcissistic impulses that had destroyed his life in the first place. Marcus understood that he would spend the rest of his life making amends for 30 seconds of viral seeking, behavior that had humiliated a good man and insulted the values of an entire nation. James Morrison continued his military service with distinction, eventually being promoted and receiving commendations for his advocacy work with fellow service members. The assault that had threatened to define his career became instead a platform for positive change and a testament to the power of grace under pressure. Years later, when asked about Marcus during interviews, James would simply say that he hoped the experience had taught valuable lessons about respect, service, and the difference between fame and honor. He never expressed personal animosity toward his attacker, focusing instead on the positive changes that had emerged from a deeply negative experience. Marcus's story became a case study in business schools and psychology programs, examined as an example of how social media culture can disconnect people from basic human empathy and the real-world consequences of their actions. His name remained synonymous with the worst excesses of influencer culture, but also served as a warning about the price of seeking validation through the humiliation of others. The lesson was clear and permanent. In an age of viral fame and instant gratification, character and consequence still mattered more than clicks and views.